as some of you may know, all of these books, and I was an editor on this book, and I was an editor on the first one, and they all tend to have a similar structure, for those of you who have had a chance to flip through them. And that was deliberate, and basically they kind of have three sections. The first section is kind of catching everybody up. Why is this important? How did we get here? What were some of the mistakes that we made along the way? And really kind of teeing up the latter two sections of the books that really delve into sort of the future and where do we want to end up at? What is our outcome that we're really trying to get to? And those two sections are very different. The middle section, which is really, I think, the meat of these books. I think it's where the really interesting ideas come out. It's kind of a grab bag of perspectives from as many people that care about these issues as we could find, all kind of writing sort of op-ed style chapters to just sort of float an idea. And it doesn't have to be the answer, but it's something worth considering. And that middle section in all four books, I think, is the most provocative of the content. And then the last section is really our attempt to distill the themes of the books down into sort of their key takeaways. A really important part of that last section is what we call the synthesis chapter. And I just want to call out Andrea Levere's contribution to this book. Really, really good. It's an amazingly difficult task. So thank you so much for that. And she's going to synthesize this conversation today at the end of this program. So stick around for that. So I just wanted to flag that I just kind of giving you a lay of the land so I could flag that middle section, this kind of grab bag of interesting ideas. This segment of the agenda is really intended to emulate that experience, what we're calling targeted talks. And actually, I'm going to invite Sam to come up. I don't know where Sam's here. Sam's going to come up. We're going to have four really thoughtful people give interesting perspectives on outcomes and how they see this field evolving. The first of our speakers is Sam Schaeffer, who is the executive director and CEO of the Center for Employment Opportunities. And he's going to spend a couple minutes, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but spend a couple minutes talking about how we need to be better at sort of a rapid prototyping, innovation, iterative approach so that we can get ultimately to the end goal. And I think, be less resistant to change and less resistant, or to the lack of change, and less resistant to failure, I think, and more comfortable with it. So in any case, Sam Schaeffer, take it away.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Sam Schaeffer. I'm the CEO at the Center for Employment Opportunities, which does make me the CEO of CEO. I would love to engage in all this enthusiasm about the Warriors, but I'm a Knicks fan. We don't believe in outcomes. So instead, let's begin by talking about outcomes in the criminal justice space. Right now, there are 2.3 million Americans behind bars in jails, prisons, and detention centers around this country. This morning, 7 million children woke up with a parent in the criminal justice system. And each of those children will be 5 to 7 times more likely to end up in the justice system themselves. Last year, the United States spent $82 billion on incarceration. It's one of the single biggest investments we'll make in any institution, and the results are beyond disappointing. Within 5 years, nearly 2/3 of those released will end up reincarcerated. Police, the courts, prisons, probation, parole, the criminal justice system is an expansive set of independent, sometimes overlapping, sometimes coordinated entities run almost exclusively by government. And given the challenges and the need for reform at each level of this system, I'd argue that just about nowhere in civic life is a focus on outcomes more critical. And yet for so long, we've oriented ourselves away from long-term results. From the 1970s until just a few years ago, it was orthodoxy that longer, harsher mandatory sentences and building hundreds of new prisons was an effective public safety strategy. We saw the failure in this, and yet we persisted in the same approach. For more than a generation, the politics, really a mythos of being tough on crime, won out over evidence and equity in justice policymaking. And we knew it would work. Programs like higher education in prison, vocational training, access to benefits, yet these programs were systematically defunded and curtailed at just about every level of government. And now A generation later, we find ourselves in a starkly different situation, one where there's appetite for reform, where there's a real enthusiasm to right the wrongs of the past. But how do we unwind 40 years of policymaking that led to mass incarceration? I would submit that one of the most effective ways we can do that is by having a dogged and absolutely relentless focus on outcomes in the work that we do as nonprofits and in government each and every day. And to be fair, government in counties and states around this country are doing amazing things. And nonprofits are serving tens of thousands of people each year in pretrial diversion programs, higher education programs in prison, and reentry services programs. I actually left government. I was working in the United States Senate to come to a nonprofit, to come to the Center for Employment Opportunities. In CEO, I saw an organization that was making deep investments in evaluation, in learning, in impact, and had the opportunity to scale. In 2009, CEO was headquartered in New York City. 8 years later, we have 16 offices across 6 states. This year, 5,000 men and women in cities ranging from Oakland to Tulsa, Philadelphia, Cincinnati will come to our offices weeks, sometimes just days after being released from prison. They'll be looking for a fresh start, but the barriers will be so significant. Maintaining sobriety, finding a safe, clean, affordable place to live, getting access to health and mental health care services, among many others. And one of the most important things, but one of the hardest things, will be finding a job. Legitimate income, something to provide for themselves and their families. Imagine coming home from prison, you have the stigma of a felony conviction on your resume, a long gap, and you lack some of the social capital that we take for granted in navigating the labor market. 50% of our participants that we see every year have never worked a full-time job before. They read at an 8th grade level, do math at a 7th grade level. And I'm proud of CEO's accomplishments in moving people at scale into the labor market. We'll make 2,500 full-time job placements a year, and multiple impact evaluations have shown that we reduce recidivism. But far more interesting to me than one organization's results, even though it's the organization I run, is how we take the lessons that CEO has generated and apply them to the broader challenge of criminal justice reform. It's been a long journey, and it's been a journey I know that many other nonprofits have been on as well. But we've done 3 things at CEO. We've developed a theory of change, we've built a giant database, and we submitted ourselves to evaluation. It wasn't an easy process. It certainly wasn't linear. There are setbacks along the way. I made sure to have failure as many times in prep calls as possible, wanted to acknowledge how hard this work was. But let me walk through each of these 3 components and how it got us to the place where we are today. First, CEO's theory of change. We clarified that our service model had just 5 key components. Recruiting high-risk, recently released individuals immediately after incarceration. Number 2, putting them into a very brief orientation program that focused on job readiness. Number 3, after that 1-week program, transitioning them immediately into paid transitional work. Number 4, leveraging that paid transitional work and the experience they gain to get a full-time private sector job. And 5th, following up with them for a year to help them move up through the job market. And as much as what this theory of change says about our organization, it's what it says about what we don't do. CEO made a decision to double down on one intervention, and that means we need other strong community providers to provide drug treatment, housing, health and mental health care services. But we made a decision that we could only hold ourselves accountable for one set of outcomes in the workforce domain and a set of outcomes in the recidivism reduction domain. The second thing we did was build the giant database. These were resources that it took that could have been spent at the time on growing our program or on meeting an immediate need. But we decided to take the step to capture every single piece of participant information and activity that happened in our program. So it's not just a profile, but it's everyone's daily attendance on a work site, their daily evaluations, even the feedback they're giving us about the job we're doing. We then put this data immediately into the hands of our staff, of our managers. It allows them to make mid-course corrections when they see a challenge in real time, but also see longitudinally how the program is doing. It requires a radical transparency. This trove of data is now opening up tremendous conversations for us with data scientists. Can we actually leverage it for machine learning, predictive analytics? But I think far more interesting than this as a data project is how it works as a culture project. It's allowed us to attract and retain staff who are similarly passionate about working with individuals, but also passionate about outcomes and data. Third, CEO has submitted itself to independent impact evaluations, now 4. These evaluations have good headlines. CEO reduces recidivism. But when you double click on those headlines, what you find is that we actually are most effective with one specific population, those who are recently released and who are considered the highest risk for return to the justice system. That actually means that there's people that we're not effective with. lower risk individuals or people who've been home from prison for 6 months, 12 months. And so we've oriented our recruitment and our strategies of engagement towards only those who we can have the most efficacy with. We did all this work for a long time in a dark corner without many people paying attention. It was a handful of foundations who championed the work, who gave us the resources we needed. But over a 10, 15-year time horizon, it's fundamentally transformed our relationships, both with philanthropy and with government. With philanthropy, it's allowed for more open and transparent conversations. It's allowed us to build the trust to have them give us those larger unrestricted sources of revenue where they know that we can make an impact. With government, they didn't fund the R&D, they didn't fund the tool development, but this project and this move by CEO helped lead to our inclusion in one of the country's first Pay for Success projects. And more recently, we've been able to initiate conversations with government, going to them with ideas for how performance-based contracts could be structured, for how impact can be written in to how we're reimbursed for our services. But again, this is broader than just the work of one organization. To return to statistics for one moment, this year, 615,000 people will come home from prisons. State prisons alone in this country. That's the size of a city like Denver or Seattle. Imagine an entire city coming home across the country to some of the highest communities of need. If we're going to have a real impact on these numbers, if we're going to leverage all the enthusiasm on sentencing reform and trying to get more people who should not be incarcerated home and having liberty and working, we have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to leverage an outcomes-based approach to give them the best quality services possible. We have this unique opportunity right now to fundamentally transform how people come home and get a job, and we need to seize it. Thank you.